Following up on my other patch 1.6 Fixlist that I published a little while ago, I'd like to talk about player build and identification today. At first, this may sound like a weird term, and it kinda is. If I'm gonna be honest with you, I sort of made that term up myself, but what I mean by it is the ability for other players within your squad and outside of your squad instead of the dark zone, to look at your health bar above your character and get information from there in regards to what build you are running, how tanky you are, and that sort of stuff. To me, this is a very important thing because it allows you to spot the tanks, the healers, and the damage players that you might meet inside of the dark zone and give you a more overall feel of what you're up against. Or you can use this to see what your own squad is running if you're, for example, using the matchmaking feature to get a squad for example, an incursion. In my opinion, PvP will never truly be even the slightest bit of competitive if you cannot know what you're fighting against, because it makes it that much harder to come up with a plan to take the opponent down. You know, a little bit of strategy instead of running around in circles like annoying mosquitoes until somebody finally gets low enough to be bursted down. But before I start off this video and talk about some of my ideas and get down to the details, I want to address the medium-sized elephant in the room, which is the argument that a lot of players want to keep the idea of mystery and not knowing what you're up against. The two biggest and most valid points that I've seen people make is that 1, giving up too much information to other players will cause, some players to only prey on the weak and detect easy targets, so to speak. And the second point is that some players, they do not want their build to be revealed and they don't want to lose the element of surprise as soon as they engage in PvP, or maybe even before that. So I looked at these points and I really see where you guys are coming from, and I have to agree to some extent. So what I tried to do with this video is I tried to implement the features in a way that will not hurt those aspects of the dark zone. But how this actually works, I'll explain that later into the video, as I think it's easier to talk about what exactly I would like to see added to the game first, and then talk about how we go about this with the PvP. So until that moment in the video, just think about everything that I'm saying in terms of PvE content. I think that's the easiest way to do it. So, what is the first thing that we add? Well, ask yourself. Let's just pretend that you want to do a couple of clear sky runs for those Phoenix credits, but hey, your friends or the people you usually play with, they are not online or they're doing something else, and you decide to use the matchmaking feature to get yourself a team. First thing that you want to know as soon as somebody joins your group. Well, what's the first thing that you want to know? What build is this guy running, and what build should I be running? Currently, there isn't really a way to tell what someone else is running other than by carefully looking at their backpack or their knee pads. So what I propose is a small logo to the right of the player's health bar, similar to that of the NPCs in the game, which will indicate what kind of a build they are running. Of course, with the NPCs, it is easy to see what you're up against. You can usually tell by their outfit and such things like that. But for those that are not familiar with every NPC in the game, you also have these logos next to their name, which new players find very helpful. The crosshair for the sniper, the shield logo for the tanks, you got the engineers, you got the buffers, and well, you got many more enemy types. I think that for starters, it would be good to have this type of thing next to players as well. Of course, this is not World of Warcraft. Players do not have specific classes. You cannot class as a tank or class as a mage. But we do have something in the game called gear sets. So to begin this all with, I think it's a good idea if players who are wearing, for example, a 4-piece of the same gear set, thus unlocking the 4-piece bonus, have the logo of that gear piece next to their health bar in place of that blue circle everyone still has, which I really don't know what the point of that thing is. Somebody has to tell me. Additionally, you can also put that logo next to their name right here in the bottom right, so that their teammates can see it even when you're not looking at them. But I think that overall this would be a very good addition to the game. And of course, I know that there are many builds that do not have a 4-piece of any specific gear set worked within them, such as an all high-end build or, for example, a 3-3 setup. But that isn't such a big problem. What I want to achieve with this logo next to everybody's name is not 100% clarity of what stats everybody has down to the percentage. But I more so want to use it to identify the bonuses that change the game the most, which are of course the 4-piece bonuses. If somebody has a 4-piece sentry and he's able to mark different targets, it would be very, very useful to know that by looking at his name. Same goes of course for the final measure. You don't want to be throwing nades at and around someone that's wearing the 4-piece. I also had the idea that you could do a mix of two icons with a split if somebody were to be running a 3-3 setup. A 3 Sentry and 3 Hunter's Fate, for example, that would look something like this. And there are more things you can do to implement to give away more details about someone's build, but I think that you get the point. With gear sets, people can play specific roles, and I think that those roles should be more easy to identify. Next up, I want to talk about the health bar. In a division, a player's health is always split up in 3 segments. This is done because some of the talents, like for example Unforgiving, Vicious, and Critical Save, they only work when a player is above or below a certain health percentage. And well, the developers, they wanted some sort of way to visualize that, so they cut the health bar in 3 segments. However, because everybody is running around with exactly 3 segments of health, it is pretty much impossible to see just how tanky you are or how tanky someone else within your team is without going to your inventory menu or by just simply asking your teammates what their toughness is. The first part, the part where you can see your own toughness off of your health bar, that is of course not such a big deal. You can just, look into the inventory and then remember it. But I think that it would be pretty useful, pretty convenient if you would be able to look at someone else's health bar and tell from that how much damage they can eat up. This would result in a more predictable time to kill in PvP, but it would also be very useful in PvE to see who's tanky and who's not. So what I'm suggesting, and you probably already saw this coming, is to base the amount of segments that someone has on their health bar on how much health they actually have on their character. So for example, someone that is quite tanky will have, let's say, 4.5 segments of health, and then someone that's relatively squishy may only have 2, or even less. It's very similar to the way that MOBA games do it. This way, if you're matchmaking and somebody joins your squad, or if you're going into the DZ and you see another player, you can kinda tell who needs to be up front and who needs to sit all the way in the back. But as much as I would like this idea to be implemented, a feature like this cannot just be thrown into the game because yes, there are a couple of pitfalls with something like this. And I want to go over those now. The first issue with this whole idea is that how tough a player really is, that is rarely decided just by his health pool alone, but more so decided by his toughness. And we cannot really let the amount of segments scale off of a player's toughness because that is something that is constantly changing due to buffs such as the booster shot, on the move, critical save, and all those things. All of those can increase your toughness by quite an insane amount, to the point where if we were to scale the segments of health to the toughness, the UI would just look like a complete mess. Imagine going from 400k toughness to 4 million. Your health bar would go from 3 segments to 30. That is something that we just can't do. But there is a solution for this. Assuming that in patch 1.6 the developers will find some way to eliminate the armor rolls from gear or to change them so that everyone sits at around the same damage mitigation at the baseline, we can start using different shades of color to indicate the amount of damage mitigation that someone has at any given point. For example, as a default with no extra damage mitigation on your character, everybody's health bar, they would look the same color. They would have the same blue or the same red as all your teammates or everyone else has in the dark zone right now. But then when someone activates a critical save, just to name an example, and they get 40% damage mitigation to their health bar, it would darken up a little bit to let everybody know that they are a bit more tanky than that they usually are. Of course, the more damage mitigation a player has, the darker they can make that health bar, and this together with the segmented health bars based on the amount of health you have, that should give everybody a more predictable time to kill, or a time to be killed, either by the NPCs or by the other players in the dark zone, which we will get to shortly. The one last thing that I wanted to go over with this segmented health bar ID before we jump into how this would work with PvP is the fact that the difference in health between players at the end game and the players at the start or in the middle of their game is, well, the difference that is quite large. And if we were to take just one scalar for the entire game, well, in that case, players wouldn't see the start of their second health segment all the way until they are at least gear score 160 or something, meaning that throughout the whole campaign, they would just see one big bar. Or you have the other example, and the players at their end game would always have their health bar divided into 30 or 40 different segments, making the UI a complete and utter mess again. So the question right now is how do we make this work throughout the entire game? Well, for starters, we can begin by changing the amount of health required for a full health segment per role tier. Yes, again, the idea of dividing things per role tier, but that's such an easy solution to all the problems in the game. This would just mean that if you're in role tier 1, you would need a lot less health to have one segment than in role tier 5, so that the average player at any gear score amount will always end up with around 3 health segments. The only problem that I see with this is if a maxed out player goes back to lower world tiers. In those cases, yes, they may have 10, 12 or 15 of those health segments, taking the extreme example. But maybe something can be done to the UI to combine multiple health segments into one once you get to a specific number to clean it up a bit. Reaching, for example, a total of 6 could make the players have 3 health segments, but with a small grey line in the middle of each of them. Reaching 9 health segments can give them the same thing, but then with 2 grey lines, and so on. We can also go the other way around. Having only 1 bar of health for the super squishy players can result in just 1 segment, but still separated in 3 pieces with those grey lines. Just so you at least have an indication of when to pop critical save and stuff like that. Also, I wouldn't really apply this health bar change from a level 1 to level 30 experience, as it would be really difficult to implement unless you go with a system that actually scales per player level, which is not impossible to do. It's very possible to do, but I think that keeping the 1 to 30 experience as it is right now, that's completely fine. It's more of a training ground for new players. And new players, well, they don't really need features that give them a more predictable time to kill, let alone a logo as to what gear set their teammates are running. Newer players are barely even learning what armor is in that case. Now the last thing that I want to talk about is, of course, the topic of how all these things can be implemented in PvP without taking away the mystery of what another player might be running with, and without making the undergeared players an obvious easy target. So first and foremost, I'd like to say that all the mentioned features do not apply to players outside of your squad. Meaning that if you see another player in the dark zone, it will be exactly the same way as that it is right now. No gear set logo and no segmented health bars based on your health. However, the features will appear under a couple of conditions. The first one is when the enemies are either rogue, or if they've done enough damage to you, that would flag them rogue. So yeah, I'm not talking about that one bullet that doesn't allow you into a checkpoint. I'm talking about the damage threshold needed to get a 20-second rogue timer above your head. This means that, yes, if you're rogue, you are initially at a slight disadvantage. Players will be able to spot your toughness, they'll be able to see what kind of gear you're running with, and yeah, that's gonna give them some insight of how they should play against you. However, once the other players start to attack the rogues, for example, and they do enough damage to you, let's say they damage you for more than 1/3 of your health, the game will consider you to be in combat with each other, and then their health, their damage mitigation amount, and their current gear set will also be visible. This system will prevent players who intend to go rogue to pre-check someone else's gear or their stats before they engage, and prevent them from preying on the weak, so to speak. Because even if you attack somebody, their toughness, their gear sets and all those things, it will not be revealed until they shoot enough bullets back, until it is clear that they want to fight. So while it kind of protects those low-level players, it also allows players that are actually on purposely fighting each other and that want to have some sort of competitive PvP environment to spot each other's healers, each other's tanks, each other's DPS players, and try to focus the right targets or come up with a more comprehensive strategy other than let's just shoot anyone and see who dies. And that is what my goal was with these IDs. I want to keep the Dark Zone experience similar to what it is right now, but I want to enhance it for those that actually want to play the PvP. And I think that doing it like this will result in just that. Now, there's one last thing that I want to mention, and that is that as I was making this video, I started to realize that most of what I just said, just here in this video, most of that, they are just quality of life features more than anything else. Of course, it would be really great if these things happened in 1.6, but I just don't know how much time Massive, Red Storm, the second wave of the ETF, and anyone else has working on patch 1.6. So I don't know if what I'm proposing in this video is actually something that's doable and realistic. So for that reason, I'm kind of tempted to wait a little bit with the rest of the videos that I was going to make for the 1.6 patch until I know more about the 1.6 patch and what they're doing with it. So maybe I'll make the rest of the videos, maybe I won't. But yeah, that is going to be all for now. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you all later. Or, like they say in the Netherlands, zie je later.